Everything was about love. Her laughter used to belong to me. I heard it as soon as I opened the front door. That small bright sound she once saved for me, now echoing off the walls of our home like it had found a new master. The house was dark in the hallway, the late afternoon light filtering through the living room windows in muted streaks, but I could still make out her silhouette near the sofa. Her head was tilted back in that familiar way, and her shoulders shook the same way they did on our wedding day when I whispered something silly at the altar. Only this time, she wasn't laughing at me or with me. She was laughing at someone else's joke. I set my keys on the small entryway table and took off my shoes, as quietly as I could. The living room curtains were half drawn, so a shade of gray lay over the furniture. There was a smell of takeout in the air. It hit me instantly. A mixture of fried onion and sweet chili sauce. Only a week before, we had ordered from the same restaurant. She had told me then that she missed me, that she felt lonely when I had to stay late at the office. Yet here it was again. A two-person portion from that place, containers neatly stacked on the coffee table, and I wasn't invited. My eyes locked onto the scattered details: a half-finished bowl, an extra pair of chopsticks, a glass with lipstick on the rim, another glass with a faint smear of something else, not her brand of gloss. I heard her voice. Maybe next time. Soft, a bit breathless. Then another voice, a man's, low and close. I didn't catch what he said. It didn't matter. His tone was the real message. He was in my spot, on our couch with my wife. My muscles tensed, and everything in my chest went rigid. I could have rushed in. I could have flipped on the lights and demanded an explanation. But I just stood there, pressed to the wall, listening to the rustle of fabric and the clink of utensils as they grazed the plates on the coffee table. My wife's name is Mary. I used to call her Mar, short and sweet, the way the sea in Spanish is just mar, a place of endless depth and hidden currents. Now she was offering those hidden currents to someone else. I knew who he was before I even saw him. I'd suspected for weeks. She'd mentioned a James, a consultant for some marketing project she was pitching in her design studio. She said he was a contact through a friend, that they'd only met in groups. But each time she mentioned him, her voice caught at the edges. She tried to mask it with a casual shrug, but I noticed. I notice everything. At least I used to. The next sound I heard was a rustle of movement that made my stomach clench, a body shifting against upholstery, a little gasp, hers, then the unmistakable tension in the air. I closed my eyes. I could picture him leaning in, brushing her hair from her shoulder with a confident hand, maybe whispering something that caused that melodic laugh. The laugh I once woke up to on Saturday mornings when she would flop onto my chest and say, "Rise and shine, lazybones." The laugh that died between us months ago. I stepped forward, quietly, trying to see them without being seen. My pulse hammered in my ears, and I tasted copper on my tongue from biting down too hard. I peered into the living room. The lamp was on in the corner, casting a gentle, golden glow, enough to see everything in crisp lines. The man, tall, broad-shouldered, with stylishly disheveled hair, leaned toward her, one arm draped on the back of the couch. She was barefoot, legs tucked beneath her, a slight flush across her cheeks. The flush I used to think was only for me. The way she smiled at him made my stomach twist in on itself. It felt like betrayal, but deeper than the typical image of a stolen kiss. This was something more intimate, her emotional closeness and her unguarded expression. I saw her reach out and touch his cheek, a gentle stroke. He turned his head and kissed her palm. My hand clenched into a fist. I was aware that I was breathing too loudly, so I forced myself to stop, to hold in the storm that raged inside my chest. I wanted to burst into that room, but a part of me felt paralyzed. I wanted to see the worst. I wanted to confirm it so deeply there'd be no space for denial. So I waited. She exhaled softly. Then she leaned in, pressing her lips to his. Brief, but unmistakable. I heard a small, involuntary sound escape my throat. Neither of them heard it, absorbed as they were in each other. I watched his hand slide along her waist, pulling her closer, and her hand entangle in his hair as though she'd done this before. I felt a surge of heat behind my eyes, tears that wanted to erupt, but I strangled them with anger. I wasn't going to cry. Not now. I turned and walked back to the front door, as silently as I could. I had enough. My hands were shaking. The emotions banged against the walls of my chest. I slipped out onto the porch and let the door close so that it made a noise. Then I opened it again, loudly this time, as if I was just arriving. I wanted them to have a moment of panic. I wanted them to realize I was home. Maybe I wanted them to scramble, to fix clothes, to jump apart. The pain in my gut told me I shouldn't give them that courtesy, that I should have confronted them in the act. But I couldn't handle that picture for one more second. I slammed the door behind me. "Mary." I called out. My voice echoed. I heard hurried whispers and the shuffle of steps. By the time I got to the living room, he was standing, adjusting his shirt, and she was picking up an empty glass, trying to look casual. Her cheeks were bright. His expression was guarded. No one said a thing for a long moment. The overhead light felt too bright. It revealed everything: the disarray of the coffee table, the boxes of half-eaten food, the tension in the air so thick you could bite it. Finally, I broke the silence. "So," I said, my voice flat. I glanced at him. "Who the hell are you?" He opened his mouth to speak, but she cut in. "Henry, it's not what it looks like." I stood there, fists at my sides. "Really? Because it looks pretty damn obvious." He extended a hand like he was expecting me to shake it. "Jim," he said softly. I didn't take his hand. "Get out." My voice was low. "Right now." Mary's eyes darted between us, a flicker of panic in them. "Henry, wait," she said. "Please. We need to talk." I stared at her. I could feel the muscles in my jaw clench. I took a quick step forward, and the guy took a half step back. He looked confident in a casual way, but in that second, I saw him weigh the odds of me breaking his jaw. He must have decided his best move was to leave quietly, because he grabbed his keys from the coffee table and glanced at Mary. She nodded, something unspoken passing between them. A silent understanding. My insides curled at that. He turned to me, lips set in a line. "I'm sorry," he said as though it meant anything. Then he walked out, quick steps echoing on the hardwood floor. The moment the front door shut, Mary let out a trembling sigh. I waited. My heart hammered so violently I thought it might burst from my chest. I forced myself to breathe, forced my arms to stay at my sides instead of smashing something. My gaze flicked to the coffee table. 2 plates, 2 sets of chopsticks, the small details she used to reserve for me. She parted her lips, started to speak, stopped, tried again. We were just talking." "Talking? Really?" My voice was harsh. "That's how you talk to your colleagues." She set down the glass she was holding. Her eyes darted to the side. "I don't have an excuse. This." She let out a shaky breath. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. My mind was a whirlwind of images, them leaning in, her shoulders trembling with that precious laughter, the way she'd touched his cheek. But it did. "How long?" She closed her eyes briefly. "A few weeks. Not long." It's complicated." I felt a burst of rage, like lightning. My hand shot out and knocked the empty glass from the coffee table. It shattered on the floor, water splashing. She jumped. I didn't care. "Complicated," I repeated. "Looks pretty simple from here." She looked up at me, tears brimming in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said, voice breaking. "I didn't mean to hurt you. You've been so distant. We barely talk." And he listened. I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "Right. He listened with his tongue down your throat." "Great." She wiped at her eyes. I needed to feel something again. You're never here. Or when you are, you're closed off. You don't see me, Henry. A wave of memories hit me. Our first date, her bright smile across a coffee table, the way she'd run her hand along my arm. The day we moved into this house, how she'd insisted on painting the kitchen cabinets white, because it made the space happier. The night our son was born, the look of pure love in her eyes as she cradled him. Then how, slowly, we let each other drift. Don't turn this around on me, I said, voice raw. You let him in. You. I struggled to keep my voice from breaking. We have a child. We have a life. Her tears fell freely now. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I messed up. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, the weather shifted. Clouds pressed against the windows, and a dull hush settled over the street. Then I realized I was trembling. She reached out a hand, but I stepped back. Don't, I muttered. Don't touch me. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Maybe pity, maybe regret, maybe shame. I turned and walked out of the living room, my feet crunching on pieces of broken glass. I headed up the stairs to our bedroom. Behind me, I heard her steps. Light. Hesitant. In our room, I flicked on the lights. The bed was unmade, the sheets tangled. My stomach turned, the possibility crossing my mind that she'd had him here. My fists clenched, but I tried to hold it together. I could sense her behind me, lingering in the doorway. Are you going to say anything else? She asked softly. My throat was tight. I turned to face her, forced my voice to stay level. You broke it, Mary, I said. You broke us. That was all I could manage before I strode toward the bathroom. Inside, I locked the door behind me. My reflection in the mirror looked as though I'd aged 10 years in a single afternoon. I had smudges of sweat near my temples, and my eyes were bloodshot. I splashed water on my face, hoping it would calm the roiling sea of fury, heartbreak, and disbelief inside me. It didn't. A soft knock. Henry, talk to me. I leaned my forehead against the mirror. The cool surface felt good against my skin. My chest was heaving with suppressed rage. Just go, I said. Her footsteps receded. I stared at the reflection again, noticing a faint smudge of pinkish red on my fingertips. Lipstick. I realized I'd touched a corner of the mirror where earlier she must have set her lipstick. An impulse shot through my mind. I took the small tube from the counter, some brand she'd left in here. I twisted it open, the deep red tip shining. Then, in shaky capital letters across the glass, I wrote, "You can still keep silent." But I can't. It felt childish, like something a teenager might do, but it gave me a strange sense of release. She had her secrets. I had this silent scream. I glared at those words. They looked like an accusation, a confession, and a farewell all at once. Finally, I stepped out. The bedroom was empty. She must have gone downstairs. I grabbed a duffel bag from the closet, started throwing clothes in it, not caring if they got wrinkled or mismatched. My teeth were clenched so hard that my jaw hurt. I found a small photo on my nightstand. Me, Mary, and our son, smiling in front of the house. The day we first moved in. I stared at that image. We looked so hopeful. I felt like an intruder in my own memory. I came downstairs. She was sitting on the couch, hugging her knees, face streaked with tears. The remains of the takeout sat on the table. I noticed the single rose in a vase by the window. One from the bouquet I gave her for our last anniversary. She kept it even after it dried out. Now it looked half dead, wilted, forgotten. She saw my bag and her eyes widened. You're leaving. I tightened my grip on the strap. I need space, I said. I can't be here with you right now. She rose, arms wrapped around herself. Where will you go? Does it matter? My voice came out hollow. She took a step forward. Henry, don't do this. We can talk. We can. Her voice trembled. Think about our son. My chest constricted. "He's at my sister's place tonight," I said, stating a fact. "He's safe. I'll figure out how to explain it to him. But I need time. Alone." Her hand rose to cover her mouth. She sobbed, once softly. "I'm sorry," she repeated. "I didn't want to hurt you." I started to walk past her, to the door. She grabbed my arm. "Please don't go. Stay. Let's just talk about everything. I'll end it with him." A burst of anger flared up in me. "End it with him," I said. "And do what? Pretend none of this happened? Pretend I didn't see you half seduced in my own living room?" I pushed her hand away. She flinched, looking at me like I was someone she didn't recognize. Maybe I was. Because everything I felt, hurt, anger, betrayal, had twisted into a single knot. All I could think was that she had let me become secondary, disposable. I opened the door. Outside, the sky had darkened, and a stiff wind whipped through the trees on our street. It smelled like rain. The forecast had said a storm was coming in. Somehow, it felt fitting. She called my name, but I stepped out onto the porch and shut the door behind me. The heavy weight in my chest made it hard to breathe. I trudged down the walkway to my car, threw my duffel in the trunk. Thunder rumbled in the distance. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of Mary's silhouette in the living room window. Then a flash of lightning erased everything. I drove aimlessly for a while, letting the city lights blur around me. I ended up parking by the lakefront, near a deserted park. The wind was strong off the water, carrying the promise of a brutal storm. I turned off the ignition and just sat there, breathing. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. I felt raw, exposed, powerless. That was the worst of it. The powerlessness of seeing your own wife with another man, of knowing you've been replaced. I clenched my fists. A wave of anger pulsed through me, and I hammered the steering wheel. "Damn it," I hissed. "Damn it all." A couple jogged by on the sidewalk, giving me a curious glance. I slumped down in my seat. The swirl of city lights reflected in the water out front. I tried to calm my breathing. Images kept coming, uninvited. Her laughter, that flush on her cheeks, the way she touched his face. I thought of how I used to crave hearing her laugh. I'd tickle her just to hear it fill our apartment back in our early years. Now that laughter was for him. A wave of nausea rolled through me. At some point, the phone buzzed in my pocket. I knew it was her. I didn't answer. Then my sister texted about our son. She asked if I was okay, if I'd be picking him up tomorrow. I replied with a quick yes, I'll pick him up in the morning. I didn't want to drag him into this yet. Eventually, the intensity of the storm outside matched the storm inside me. Rain battered the windshield. Thunder cracked. I felt the car shake under the gusts of wind. I closed my eyes and let the crashing sky echo the chaos in my head. I must have dozed off, because I woke to a tapping on the window. A police officer in a dripping raincoat. I rolled the window down a crack. "You all right here, sir?" he asked, shining a flashlight into the car. "Lot of water pooling. Might want to move along. Storm's gotten worse." "I'm fine," I said. My voice was hoarse. "Just needed some air." He nodded, though he gave me a concerned look. "Try to find a safer spot," he said before walking away. I started the car again, feeling a slight pang in my chest at how pathetic this scene was. Then I drove off, heading to a motel on the outskirts of the city. I checked into a dingy room with flickering neon outside the window, the rain pounding on the roof. The place smelled of old carpet and cleaning chemicals. It was the kind of place you go to forget or be forgotten. Exactly what I needed. Inside, I tossed my bag on a chair, sank onto the bed, staring at the damp patches on the ceiling. My mind spun with images of her and him. The memory of how she once looked at me with adoration twisted into the memory of her looking at him the same way, or maybe more. I wondered when exactly she decided to let him in. Was it a single moment of weakness or a slow fade over months? Maybe I had missed 1,000 signs while I was busy at work, or lost in my own world. Or maybe I just refused to see them because I trusted her. I pressed my palms against my eyes until fireworks of color danced behind my lids. Then I let my hands fall away. I couldn't stop the swirl of anger. It was like an itch I couldn't scratch. A humiliating, maddening knowledge. I wasn't enough for her. Outside, the storm raged all night. I barely slept, drifting in and out of a restless doze. Morning came, pale and watery, and I forced myself up. I took a shower in the cramped bathroom, stared at the dingy white tiles while water hammered my neck and back. My mind replayed the scene from last night. The glass I smashed, the lipstick scrawl on the mirror, the conversation, if you could call it that, when she begged me to stay. I turned the shower off. I'd never felt so hollow. I toweled off, dressed in fresh clothes from my bag, grabbed my keys, and headed for the door. It was time to pick up my son from my sister's. On the way, I grabbed a coffee at a drive-thru, though it tasted like bitter water in my mouth. My sister's house was a modest place in a quiet suburb. My son came barreling out as soon as he heard the car, calling for me. He was only 8, with my same light hair, a sweet grin, and an innocent confidence that everything in the world would always be right. I forced a smile. "Hey, buddy," I said, ruffling his hair. He stared at me, frowning. "Dad, are you okay?" I glanced at my sister, who hovered on the porch. She looked at me with a mix of pity and worry. "I'm fine," I lied. "Everything's good." My sister bit her lip but said nothing. I muttered a thank you and led my son to the car. I had no plan. I felt disoriented, like I was stumbling through a minefield with no map. I drove aimlessly for a while, the boys' chatter filling the silence with talk of school, weekend cartoons, and a soccer game he wanted to watch. My responses were half-formed murmurs. Finally, he asked, "Dad, when are we going home?" My chest tightened. I knew I couldn't run from this forever. Not sure, buddy. Might stay at a hotel for a bit." "Why?" he asked, eyes wide. I swallowed. "Your mom and we need to sort some things out." He nodded, though I could see confusion. He looked out the window. "I miss Mom." I clenched the steering wheel. "I know," I said quietly. "We'll figure it out." The rest of the day was a blur of forced normalcy. I tried to put on a brave front, taking him to get a sandwich for lunch, letting him pick out a new comic book. All the while, my phone buzzed with messages from Mary. I ignored most of them, only skimming. They ranged from begging me to come home to promising it was over with Jim, to mild accusations that I'd left her in the middle of everything. My emotions churned. I didn't respond. That evening, we checked into a slightly better motel, so my son wouldn't feel spooked. He was enthralled by the novelty of it, but I saw him searching my face for clues. We ate pizza in silence. He fell asleep early, cartoons droning softly on the TV. I sat in a half-lit room, counting the lines on the cheap wallpaper. The bitterness in my throat felt like acid. She called. I finally picked up, stepping outside so I wouldn't wake him. "Henry," her voice said. She sounded relieved I'd answered. "We need to talk." "What's left to say?" My tone was clipped. I know you're mad," she said, voice trembling. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You said that last night." She drew a shaky breath. "I know, but I need you to come home. Our son needs stability. We can't just run away from this." I glanced back at the window of the motel room, at the silhouette of my boy through the curtains. "I'm not running," I said. "I'm trying to keep myself from losing it completely." Silence on the line. "Then, please, come talk to me." I hesitated. I hated the idea of leaving my son alone, even for a short while. "I'm with him," I said. "Bring him. This is his home. Let's just be under the same roof. We can sleep in separate rooms if you want, but let's try to figure something out. I owe you that much." He deserves that much. I stared at the dark sky. The rain had cleared, leaving a crisp chill. Was I really going to let her talk me into returning to that place? My gut churned. Yet she was right. We had a child. We had a life. Even if it felt shattered, I couldn't just keep drifting in motel limbo. I'll think about it, I said, and hung up. I ended up tossing and turning for hours. When morning came, I felt no better. My son insisted we go home. He wanted his own room, his toys, his life. So, despite the dread, I drove us back. The house was quiet, the front lawn still littered with fallen branches from the storm. I parked at the curb. My heart pounded. Inside, Mary waited in the living room. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, her hair tied back. Her eyes were puffy from crying. When she saw our son, she rushed over, embraced him, whispered something about missing him. Then she looked at me, lips trembling. "Thank you for bringing him home." I nodded curtly. My son was already bounding upstairs to his room. I heard him call out something about being hungry. Mary looked at me. "I'll make him breakfast," she said in a low voice. "Then we can talk." "Fine," I said. While she cooked, I wandered around the house. In the bathroom, the lipstick words still glared from the mirror. "You can still keep silent." But I can't. I ran a fingertip over the smudged letters. They were half-wiped, like she'd tried to remove them, but couldn't erase them completely. Symbolic, I thought bitterly. After breakfast, our son settled in his room to watch something on his tablet. I went to the den, the place I used to do my work calls. Mary followed me in. I stood there, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the floor. "Talk," she swallowed. "I ended it with him," she said. "I told him never to come back here, never to call me again." "Just like that?" I asked, voice cold. "Why should I believe you?" Her eyes brimmed with tears. "I can show you the texts." I told him it was a mistake, that I love my family, that it was wrong, that I never should have let things get that far. I gave a hollow laugh. "You think that fixes it?" I snapped. "I saw you. I heard you laugh for him. When's the last time you laughed like that for me?" She flinched, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I can't take back what I did," she whispered. "But I'm done lying. I won't hide anything anymore. Ask me whatever you want." I inhaled sharply, anger simmering. "Did you let him into our bed?" She shook her head. "No. I swear, Henry, it was only in the living room. We kissed. We touched, but we didn't go to bed." My hands curled into fists at the mental image. "Why him?" I asked. "What was so special?" Her voice came out shaky. "He gave me attention. He made me feel noticed, important. He listened to my ideas, my frustrations. You were always busy, always shutting down, pushing me away." I snapped. "I was working to keep this house, this life." My voice rose. Then I forced it down to a hiss. "I was trying to provide for you and our son, and you repay me by throwing your affections at some consultant." She put her face in her hands and sobbed. I felt the urge to comfort her, but it collided with my anger. I stood rigid. Finally, she managed to speak through her tears. "I know. I'm sorry. I was selfish and stupid. I hate what I've done." Silence filled the den. I stared out the window, watching the sky shift from gray to a patch of pale sunlight. A day ago, I had fantasized about how I'd confront them if I ever caught them in the act. Now, I'd done it, and all I felt was a hollow ache. She cleared her throat. "What? What do you want to do? Do you want a divorce?" Her voice sounded fragile, like she was terrified of the answer. I pressed my lips together. I wanted to yell yes, to end it, to walk away. But a part of me couldn't. Our son was upstairs. Our entire life was here. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I'm furious. I'm hurt. I don't know if I can forgive you." She exhaled shakily. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said. "Therapy, time, space. I'll prove to you that I can fix this." I said nothing. My mind was a battlefield of conflicting impulses, rage, sorrow, longing for what we once had. "I'm staying in the guest room," I finally muttered. She nodded, tears still streaking her face. "Okay." That night, I lay alone in the guest bed, staring at the ceiling. The house felt tense. We tried to pretend for our son's sake, acting normal. Inside me, emotions churned. I wanted to lash out, to hurt her the way she hurt me. But I couldn't do it in front of him. So I festered in silence. Days passed. We existed under one roof like strangers. She texted me from work, asking how I was, telling me she missed me. I rarely answered. She tried to cook dinner, tried to share small talk, but I shut it down. My son sensed something was wrong, but neither of us gave him a straight explanation. We couldn't. Or maybe we wouldn't. One afternoon, I found the fresh bouquet of roses on the kitchen table. She bought them, placed them in a vase, a note attached, for hope. I stared at them, at the soft pink petals. They looked like a mocking reflection of everything I'd lost. She came home later and saw me gazing at them. She tried to speak. I held up a hand, walked away. She left them there, their sweet fragrance filling the room like a silent apology. That night, I was in the guest room, a single lamp on. I scrolled through old pictures on my phone. Vacations, birthdays, ordinary days when we smiled at each other. My heart squeezed with a mix of regret and anger. I locked the phone, set it aside. Then, impulsively, I opened my laptop and wrote an email. It was short, addressed to her. "I can't stay. I'm leaving." But I didn't send it. I just stared at the blinking cursor. Anger simmered beneath my skin, the living thing. I closed the laptop. Sleep wouldn't come. The next morning, I woke early. She was already up, making coffee. I sat at the table, glaring at my mug as she poured me some. She looked at me with cautious eyes. "Will you at least let me explain how things got this way?" she asked quietly. I shrugged. "Go ahead." She told me how lonely she felt, how each day she'd come home to a version of me that was either exhausted, distant, or stressed out. She said the love hadn't died overnight, but had been drowned under layers of resentment and unspoken frustration. She admitted she should have spoken to me, fought for us, instead of turning to someone else for emotional and almost physical fulfillment. She cried. I listened with my jaw tight. My chest hurt. "You never said you were that unhappy," I finally muttered. She wiped her cheeks. "I tried. Maybe not enough. Maybe you didn't hear me. I don't know. I'm not blaming you, but it takes two to break something." I wanted to refute it, but I knew she wasn't entirely wrong. We had both let walls grow between us, each day adding another brick, but none of that justified her betrayal. Days blurred into a week, then two. I maintained my distance, though I stayed in the house for our son's sake. Sometimes I felt an urge to talk, to fix something, but the memory of her lips on his, that laughter, like a knife in my back, always stopped me. She tried to earn back my trust in small ways, made my favorite meals, asked me about my day, offered to help with tasks. But I was numb. Late at night, I sat in the kitchen with a bottle of whiskey, the only place I could let my anger breathe. One evening, out of nowhere, I felt my composure snap. She found me in the living room, sifting through old mail. Jim's name appeared on an envelope, some marketing flyer, likely a leftover from the project she'd done with him. The sight of his name in my house set me off. I tore the envelope in half and hurled it aside. She walked in just then and saw me, eyes wide. She started to speak. I cut her off, my voice loud and cold. "You let him come here. You let him own your laughter. You let him feed you from those boxes like a couple. You let him see that softness you used to show only me." "Henry." She tried to approach. I stepped back. "No, not now." I felt my pulse pounding in my temples. "What do you want from me?" "Forgiveness. Understanding. Did you ever think how humiliating this is for me? That I might walk around town wondering who knows. She shook her head, tears forming. No one knows. It was only once here, I swear. I never wanted. But you did. I spat. You wanted it enough to do it. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing. I glared at her, a savage part of me satisfied by her tears. Then I stormed upstairs, locked myself in the guest room, trying not to slam the door and wake our son. I realized in that moment that some part of me wanted revenge, wanted her to feel every ounce of the betrayal. I couldn't stand the thought of letting her get off easy. But I also knew this couldn't go on forever. I could either heal or destroy everything. That night, I sat awake, thinking of ways to get back at her, vindictive fantasies about humiliating her in front of Jim, or telling the entire family what she did. But none of it would erase my pain. Eventually, the swirling rage wore me out, and I drifted into a fitful sleep. The next day, Mary approached me in the hallway while our son was at school. Her eyes were puffy. She clutched an envelope in her hands. "I wrote you a letter," she said. "Everything's in there." I looked at the envelope. My name was written in her familiar script. I didn't take it. "What does it say that you couldn't say to my face?" She shook her head. I couldn't find the words out loud. It's everything. Please read it." I watched her hold it out. Finally, I sighed and took it from her. Fine. She left me there, alone. I was about to open it when the doorbell rang. My stomach clenched. If that was Jim, I'd kill him. I hurried to the door, pulled it open. It was only the mail carrier. My heart pounded even after he left. I retreated to the den and stared at the envelope in my hand. I opened it, found a letter in her neat handwriting. I read, "Henry, I know I can't undo what I did. I know I hurt you. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you the truth of what I've been feeling and thinking. The distance between us grew so slowly, I didn't see it at first. I remember all the nights we shared in laughter, and I kept hoping it would come back. When it didn't, I felt lost. Jim was a mistake, but a mistake I need to own. I let the attention he gave me fill a void inside me that I was too afraid to address with you. I betrayed our marriage. That shame will stay with me forever. You have the right to hate me, or to leave me. If that is what you decide, I won't fight you. All I want is for you to know I still love you. I always have. It was never about not loving you. It was about feeling unloved myself, and I couldn't face telling you. I was weak. I'm asking for your forgiveness. But I know I don't deserve it easily. I'm willing to work for it, every day, if you'll let me. If you choose to leave, I understand. But if there's any chance we can rebuild, I will do everything it takes. I made a terrible choice, and I'll spend the rest of my life apologizing for it. You're a good man, Henry. I see that now more than ever. I'm sorry I didn't treat you like one." "Mary," I set the letter down. My hands shook. A swirl of emotions battered me. Anger, pity, heartbreak, faint hope, disgust. I crumpled the paper slightly, then smoothed it out. I folded it and placed it on the desk. That evening, as the sun set, I sat on the porch. The air smelled of rain again, heavy clouds on the horizon. My mind drifted. A part of me wanted to tear that letter to shreds, walk away for good. Another part remembered the bright laugh we shared long before all this. Our child. The home we built. The life we wanted. She came out, stood in the doorway. "Can I sit with you?" I shrugged. She came and sat on the step, a careful distance away. We didn't speak for a while. Finally, she said, "If you want to leave, I won't stop you. But I do want you to know I meant every word in that letter." I nodded, not looking at her. "I know." Silence again. The first drops of rain started falling. She stood, lightly touched my shoulder, then stepped back. "Come inside before it pours," she said quietly, and disappeared inside. I stayed outside in the drizzle, letting the water hit my face. Eventually, the drizzle turned into heavier rain. I got up. went in. She was in the living room, turning off lights. Our son was asleep. She looked at me questioningly. I just nodded once, headed upstairs. In the guest room, I collapsed on the bed. My head pounded. The next day, something snapped in me. I realized the endless tension was poisoning the air for our child. I had to make a decision. Either truly try to heal or walk away. I stared at the letter again. My anger was still huge, but so was a glimmer of another emotion. Maybe love, maybe memory, maybe fear of losing the life I'd known. I came downstairs. She was in the kitchen. I spoke, my voice calm and low. "Let's go to counseling," I said. "I'm not promising anything. But if we can do that, at least we can say we tried." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, a flicker of relief in her gaze. "Thank you," she whispered. We found a therapist. We scheduled sessions. Each one was a battlefield of tears, resentment, revelations. I told her how betrayed I felt, how humiliating it was to watch her share that laughter with another man. She told me how lonely she'd been, how she'd shut down her own voice for fear of hurting my pride. We argued, we cried, we sat in sullen silence. During one session, I asked the therapist, "How do I get past the image of them together?" I felt my throat tighten. "I can't unsee it." The therapist said, "It'll never be unseen. You can only decide if you want to integrate that pain into your future or let it define you forever." I left that session feeling battered but oddly lighter. Mary tried every day to show me she was committed to repairing our marriage. She gave me passwords to her phone, her laptop. She texted me updates about where she was, who she was with. But trust isn't built overnight. I remained distant. Jim tried to call her once, from a blocked number. She told me, showed me the missed call. She didn't pick up. Something about that transparency made a hairline crack in my armor. Another day, I found a note on my desk. "I'll never laugh like that with him again." It struck me so hard, I had to sit down. Little by little, we established some form of civility, if not closeness. Our son seemed happier, sensing we weren't on the verge of explosion. I still slept in the guest room. I still had nightmares of discovering them. But I was no longer stewing in silent revenge. Instead, I felt an unsteady hope that maybe we could piece ourselves together. Then one night, I came home from work to find her in the kitchen, cooking. She had music on, one of our old playlists. She turned around with a hopeful smile. "I made your favorite. Thought maybe we could watch a movie after dinner, together, with our son." For a moment, I froze. Then I nodded. "Sure," I said softly. We ate. We watched the movie. Our son sat between us, laughing at the silly parts. My chest tightened with a blend of sorrow and contentment. She and I shared a tentative smile. After we put him to bed, we sat on the couch in silence. She looked at me. I could see vulnerability in her eyes. I spoke first. "I'm still angry," I said quietly. "But I'm trying." She nodded, tears shining. "Thank you," she whispered. We didn't touch or kiss, but for the first time, I felt the faint possibility of closeness again. Therapy continued. Days turned into weeks. I battled with myself, sometimes wanting to throw it all away, sometimes wanting to hold on. She faced my anger, my painful questions with open honesty. Slowly, the rage cooled into a heady ache. The ache, in turn, evolved into a cautious willingness to see if we could move forward. At one point, the therapist suggested a short separation might help us gather our thoughts. Mary looked panicked at the idea, but I agreed it might be good. I found a small apartment not too far away, so I could still see our son often. For a month, we lived apart. We kept going to therapy. We texted, but without illusions. She told me she missed me. I told her I wasn't sure what I wanted. That was the honest truth. During that month, something in me shifted. I realized I was grieving not just her betrayal, but also the version of myself I'd lost in the daily grind. I recognized I'd shut her out in my own ways. That didn't excuse her cheating, but it put it in context. I remembered that love is rarely just about the big gestures. It's about the daily presence, the shared understanding, the quiet comfort. We lost that. At the end of the month, we sat down in therapy again. I spoke, my voice trembling. I want to come home. I'm ready to try. She broke down in tears. I swear, I'll never hurt you like that again. I believed her, or at least I wanted to. I moved back in. We slept in separate rooms initially, but gradually we found small moments of intimacy, holding hands, a tentative kiss on the cheek, a gentle hug. Each time, I felt both longing and resentment. But I kept going. She kept going. It took countless conversations, tearful nights, near endings. We faced the truth. We'd neglected each other for years. She made a horrible, hurtful choice in how she responded to that neglect. I had to decide if I could accept that and trust her again. Gradually, her face lit up when she saw me, in a new but familiar way. I found myself wanting to share details of my day with her, to hear about her design projects. We started carving out time for just us. No phone, no distractions, short walks around the neighborhood. Our son noticed. He smiled more, asked if we were friends again. That question almost broke my heart. One evening, we sat in the living room, the same couch where she'd once let him in, the same place I saw them together. My chest tightened. She noticed, placed her hand over mine. "Are you okay?" I swallowed. "I still see you with him," I admitted softly. In my mind, her eyes filled with tears. "I wish I could erase that memory," she said. "If I could go back and undo it, I would. But I can't." I squeezed her hand. "I know. I'll handle it," I said. It still hurts." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. She leaned over and gently, carefully, rested her head on my shoulder. I let her. My heart pounded, but I didn't pull away. She smelled of the same shampoo as always, something citrusy. A wave of both comfort and sadness flooded me. That night, she came to the guest room. We sat on the bed, facing each other. She was trembling, her eyes full of emotion. I placed a hand on her cheek. This was the woman I married, the mother of my child, the one I'd built a life with. She closed her eyes, tears sliding down. Slowly, I leaned in, pressed my forehead to hers. "Henry," she breathed. "I love you." A painful lump rose in my throat. "I know," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm trying to trust that again." She kissed me softly, hesitantly. For a moment, I stiffened, but then I let myself sink into it. We kissed like two people rediscovering each other, uncertain but desperate to hold on. That night, we stayed together, our emotions raw, our words few. There was no cinematic resolution, just two wounded souls trying to mend what they had shattered. I didn't see it as forgiveness, not yet. More like a truce, a choice to open the door to healing. I still had anger inside me. I still felt an urge for some form of vengeance, but it was fading under a deeper desire to save the family we built. And in that moment, as I held her, I realized that not all scars are meant to vanish. Some remain as reminders of what we overcame. In the weeks that followed, we told each other everything we'd hidden in our hearts. We argued again, we apologized again. Slowly, the laughter returned, first strained, then more genuine. She took my hand one afternoon after therapy and said, "We'll never be who we were before, but maybe we can be something stronger." I nodded, not fully trusting it, but willing to try. The ghost of Jim lingered in my mind, but each day that passed without him, each day she proved her commitment, that ghost faded a bit. Eventually, it was just a whisper, a painful memory that taught us both the value of honesty and the cost of neglect. Our story isn't a neat fairy tale. We live with the knowledge of betrayal, the knowledge that any love, no matter how strong, can be broken if left unattended. But we also discovered that sometimes Pain can force two people to confront what they've become and remember why they chose each other in the first place. One evening after our son was asleep, we sat on the porch. The summer air was warm, the sky clear. She tucked her legs beneath her, leaning against my shoulder. I heard her laugh at something I said. Soft, genuine, and for a second, it reminded me of the day I first fell in love with her. My heart clenched with a mix of gratitude and sorrow. Because everything was about love. And sometimes love means fighting through the worst storms if you still see a ray of light on the other side. I didn't say that out loud. I just squeezed her hand, letting the night air carry away the echoes of that old pain. We stayed like that, quietly together, uncertain but no longer silent. The memory of betrayal might never fully leave, but it doesn't have to be the end. We chose, despite everything, to keep walking forward, step by step. And in that choice, I found a powerful, if fragile, kind of peace.